Have you ever been there? You're running a complex task in JavaScript, and you just watch your entire application grind to a halt. Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into exactly why that happens, and more importantly, how you can fix it to keep your user experience perfectly smooth and responsive.
We've all felt this pain. You click a button, and boom, the page is frozen solid. You can't click anything, you can't scroll, it's just stuck. It's got to be one of the most frustrating problems in web development. So what is actually going on under the hood?
And the culprit? Well, it's baked right into the very nature of JavaScript itself. See, it's single-threaded, which basically just means it can only do one thing at a time. So when it gets bogged down with some big, time-consuming calculation, everything else, we're talking animations, button clicks, any user interaction, it all has to wait in line. This is what we call blocking the main thread.
So how do we get around this? We're going to explore two really powerful solutions. First up, we're going to meet web workers, our background hero. Then we'll take a look at generators, the pausable function. And finally, we'll put them head-to-head so you'll know exactly which tool to reach for and when.
Okay, let's kick things off with our first solution, the one that's designed for pure heavy lifting, the web worker.
So what in the world is a web worker? Think of it as a script that lets you run JavaScript in a completely separate parallel thread. And the magic here is that this background thread doesn't block the main thread, which means it's totally free to keep the user interface zippy and responsive.
Okay, so how do they talk to each other? The main script can't just call a function in the worker directly. Instead, it works like a messaging system. The main script spins up the worker and then sends it a message using post message. The worker listens for that message, does all the heavy lifting, and then uses its own post message to send the result back. It's a completely clean handoff.
So this brings us to a few ground rules. Web workers run in a truly separate thread. That is their superpower. And they only communicate using that post message system. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. A web worker has absolutely zero access to the DOM. That means no manipulating HTML, no document, no window. It's purely for computation.
So what does that make them perfect for? Well, think of anything that just takes a ton of time and processing power. We're talking about crunching huge data sets, doing context image filtering, or parsing massive amounts of API data. Basically, any long-running task that would otherwise freeze your UI is a prime candidate for a web worker.
All right, time for our second hero. Now, if web workers are all about raw performance, generators are all about control. They solve a different but equally important problem, managing the flow of your code's execution.
You see, a generator is a special type of function, but it has this incredible superpower. It doesn't have to run to completion all at once. You can actually pause it right in the middle of its execution, go do other things, and then come back and resume it exactly where you left off. This gives you an amazing amount of fine-grained control.
And how does this magic work? It's all in the syntax. You declare a generator with function star. That little star is the key. And then, inside of it, you use the yield keyword to create those pause points.
Let's walk through how this actually runs. First, you call the generator function, but get this, it doesn't run yet. It just gives you back a special generator object. Then, every time you call .next on that object, the function runs until it hits a yield statement. Then it pauses, hands you whatever value was yielded, and just waits patiently for the next .next call to continue.
So really, it all boils down to this little dance between yield and next. Yield is the stop sign. Next is the green light. And every single time you call next, you get an object back that tells you two things: the value that was just yielded, and a little Boolean flag called done that lets you know if the function has finally finished its run.
So where does this really shine? Well, imagine you're processing a huge file or a data stream. You can just yield each piece one by one without loading the whole monstrous thing into memory. They're also fantastic for creating things like infinite sequences, say an endless series of random numbers, or for managing really complex stateful async operations.
All right, so we've met our two heroes, the background powerhouse and the master of control. Now let's put them side by side to really highlight their unique strengths and make it crystal clear when you should use each one.
So what is the real difference here? They both seem to handle complex tasks, but you know what? They do it in fundamentally different ways, for completely different reasons.
Let's just break it down. A generator at its heart is a function. A web worker, on the other hand, is a whole separate thread. A generator's whole purpose is to pause and resume for control, while a web worker's purpose is to run in the background for performance. This means you use generators for managing data flow, and you use web workers for that heavy lifting. And, of course, the biggest difference of all, Generators stay right there on the main thread, while web workers get their own.
If you only take away one thing from this, let it be this. Think of generators as a pause and resume function. You are controlling the execution step by step. And think of web workers as a way to run code in the background. You're offloading a heavy task completely.
So now for the final step. Let's put this knowledge into practice. We're going to distill everything we've just talked about into one simple, actionable rule that'll guide your decision-making from here on out.
And here it is, the one rule to remember. Use generators for control flow. Use web workers for performance. If you need to manage a sequence of steps, think generators. If you need to offload a single, massive calculation, think web workers. Honestly, it's that simple.
So, now that you have these two incredibly powerful tools in your arsenal, the only question left is, what will you build? Whether you're wrangling a massive data stream or processing some seriously complex calculations, you now know how to keep your application fast, responsive, and most importantly, a pleasure to use.